After watching part 1 of this IIT NET hands-on series video, I hope you're excited to complete the internationalization implementation with me. So far, we have covered how to build the fundamentals of a blog using Astro and Storyblok together. In this part of the video, I will use the fundamentals we built in the previous video to complete building a multi-language blog. Hey everyone, my name is Arisa and I'm a DevRel engineer at Storyblok. This is part 2 of the Astro and Storyblok multi-language blog tutorial series. If you haven't watched the part 1 video, go to the part 1 video first, then come back to this part 2 video. In this video, I will cover part 5 and 6 of our ultimate tutorial series, available in the description below. We will complete this video to create and render articles and manage multilingual content. If you want to fork each part of the tutorial, check out our GitHub repos corresponding branches, available in the description below. Alright, in this section, we are going to create and render the blog articles. To get started, I would like to double check if we have 3 important components. Go to the blog library, and in here, I want you to double check if you have all articles, article, and popular articles components. We pushed component schemas through our Storyblok CLI using a JSON file I provided in the previous video. You can download the JSON file in the description below, and you also can check how to push these component schemas from the previous video. Next up, I would like to create a new folder. So let's close this blog library module. I'm going to open up this down arrow, click this create a new content, select the folder. I'm going to give a name here as blog, starting from capital. And this time, at the content type, instead of choosing the old types, I'm going to select restrict content type. So instead of having this default page content type, I want to have article content type to be selected, so that inside of this blog folder, stories or the pages would only choose the article's content type. Let's hit the create button. And now inside of this blog folder, I want to create minimum 3 stories, or up to you. You can create 4 or more of the stories inside. So let's give a name as article 1. And I'm going to hit the create button. But before doing that, let's pay attention to the content type. Instead of selecting from all the other content types we created, we already have a placeholder article content type set. So I'm going to hit the create button. And of course, I get the 404 because we haven't yet filled out any information so far. And I don't think we have configured more details about this article content type. But let's keep creating the rest of the 2 more articles, stories. So I'm going to create article 2 story, hit the create button, article 3 story, hit the create button. All right, we checked out one of the 3 important components we imported through the JSON component schema article. Next up, I'm going to check out the popular articles. I'm going to open up this blog library, find the popular articles in the bottom here. So this popular article actually works as a component, a nestable component to display the popular articles on the home story. So I'm going to show you the configuration in this popular articles because it has, let me go to the fields, go into the articles multi options, because in here it has a couple of useful restrictions, such as path to the folder of the stories. So instead of letting our content editors define from all different, folders that you're going to create, you are giving the right, let's say, path already of the folder so that they can already have a look at specific folders inside to pick the stories. And another useful restriction in here is restrict to the content type. So we restrict additionally the content type to select only the stories that are used in the articles. Let's check out the 3rd important component that we want to pay attention in this section. I'm going to search all articles and select this component to have a look at which kind of field types we can see in here. So this component works as the blog overview in the most root of the blog folder inside. So we will be able to see all the available articles inside of this blog folder. We are going to programmatically render these list of the all blog articles. So that's why I only define this headline simple short text field type. Let's add these three components into the Astro's config file. Go to the VS Code, open up an astro.config.mjs file, and at the components, this is where I want to add these three components. So here's the popular articles, all articles, an article. Make sure that you wrap with the single quote if you have more than, like one word combined component's name, especially binding them with the hyphens, so that our SDK would be able to recognize these components with the correct technical names. Same for the Storyblok side. Let's create an article component so that we can render the single article stories on the Storyblok's UI. I'm going to close this Astro's config file, open up the sidebar under the directory of Storyblok. That's where I'm going to create an article component. With the right click, I can choose this new file option and article.astro. So I'm going to take a shortcut, and of course you can follow me. So go into the browser and at our ultimate tutorial GitHub repo, make sure that we are at the part 5 branch. So in the directory of the source Storyblok article.astro, we can actually copy and paste the lines of the code you see here. So let's copy all of them, going back to the VS Code and paste it. I want to make a very little modifications in here because we are not using the Astro's image component. So I'm going to import the image component from Astro and swap this image element with an Astro's image component. So let me take a little bit of shortcut so that you don't need to see me typing every single stuff, because that's what we already covered in details in the previous video. There are two new things I want to quickly explain you in this articles component file. First of all, at this image component, you see this new parameters that probably looks new to you, because this is one of the features from the Storyblok called image service. And that's what you see, the additional parameters being added on the source attribute. And this is for generating the optimizing the resize images in general. You can do much more things, such as setting the focal point, setting the filters, etc. But for more details, I want you to check out more details in the description below, because that's where I added the documentations about the image service. The second thing I wanted to show you or explain you in this article component is how to handle or how to resolve the rich text. So as you can see, Storyblok's Astro SDK already provides a built-in render rich text function, means that you don't need to create such functionality from scratch on your own. Instead, you can make sure to import this render rich text function and then call it for the main blog post, so that you can, or your users can, have a look at the paragraphs of the articles and the main body of the content. And in this example, I stored in the variable called render rich text and call this function and set the JSON path of the data that I want to receive or retrieve this blog content, and called inside of this JSX scope. If you want to have a look at more details, then I would recommend you to see the documentation, which is available in the Astro SDK's README, and I have also added this documentation URL in the description below. We created an article component on the source code level. Next up, let's fill out the content itself on the visual editor. So after saving the progress of the article component, let's move on to the VS Code on the browser. Right now we see the error But first of all, let's fill out the content on the field types first. So this is an article 1. So I'm going to choose the article 1's hero image, and there's a title, article 1, and I'm going to copy a little bit of a filler in this teaser is cool. And again, I'm going to fill out the content in here, which is where we use the rich text in here. Article 1 is cool. Hi there. So let's hit the save button. And I got the feeling we get the same error because this is about a missing component we define on the configuration file. So far we only created an article content type component. So that's why it's yelling at us that there's no component created or configurations of the popular articles and the old articles as well. So let's solve this. I'm going to move on to the VS Code, open up a Astro's config file, and here, this is where we registered our components. But we are going to create these components in the further steps, but not yet. So I'm going to temporarily comment these out and hit the save button and check it out on the browser. So yeah, there you go. As we guessed from the error log from the Astro side, now we can have all the content being rendered for the single articles. We can move on to fill out, let's say, the content for the article 2 on article 3, but for the time's sake, I'm not going to show that, but feel free to fill out on your end. Let's create a popular articles component. So another shortcut, let's open up a browser and have a look at our ultimate tutorial. We are at the part 5 branch, and make sure to open up a file called populararticles.astro in the directory of source and Storyblok. Again, we are going to copy the code in here. So let's select all the lines we have, copy that, move on to the VS Code. I'm going to create popular articles component under the directory of the Storyblok, create a new file, populararticles.astro. So paste what I copied before, and we get an error because this component is the component we haven't yet created. But don't worry about it. We are going to create shortly later. So what I'm doing in here is that, well, of course, we want to make this component to be editable on our visual editor. So I call the Storyblok editable and wrapping in the most outer layer in the JSX scope. So inside in here, what I want to achieve is that I'm going to actually map the available articles that we have inside of the blog folder and to, let's say, loop as many, not as many as, because we set the limit to have like up to 3 articles to be, like mapped out so that we can display 3 popular articles on the home story. So here the single article actually has the data path to follow with the content slug, and that's what we can also check out on the draft JSON file. And what we return is we return as an article card component so that we have a nice style applied to this every single popular articles component. We created the popular articles component, but we still have this issue that we haven't yet created this article card component we import inside of the popular articles component. So let's solve this issue. I'm going to open up the sidebar, and instead of inside of the Storyblok component, I'm going to create this article card component under the directory of the components. Because this component actually only exists in the source code level, we didn't create this component inside of the Storyblok UI. So any components that we only programmatically, let's say, controls would live inside of the components directory. So article car.astro, and then I'm going to use the same way. from when I created these popular articles. So for the time's sake, I've already copied and pasted from our GitHub repo. You can find with the same way what I did on the popular articles. So the reason why I did is because pretty much everything what you can see in here are already familiar, and that's what we covered together in the previous videos as well and a few minutes ago. So I'm not going to cover too much about it, but to explain you what this component actually works would be that this component would apply a nice style to display each popular cars inside of the popular articles component. So now after saving it and going back to the popular articles, I do not see the error coming anymore because we imported the existing component and also calling it in the right scope. Based on the two components we created, we are going to create the fundamentals of how we can resolve the relations of the popular articles. So I'm back at the very root of the home story. So in here, let's actually add the popular articles component we configured and also imported as a component schema. Select the popular articles inside of the headline field type, fill out the headline as you like. Inside of the articles field type, I'm going to select up to 3 articles. So hit the add button and hit the save button, but I'm quite sure it's not going to work. So here's the reason why. Well, first of all, the articles field type right here, this includes the UUIDs of these stories, such as article 1, 2, 3. And what I mean by that to say the UUIDs are actually these values. I'm going to show you the JSON file of this home story. So inside of the home story, there is the articles inside of the popular articles component. And as I selected up to 3 articles, I was able to get sort of the IDs, but this is not detailed enough to resolve the relations in between the popular articles I selected and this home story. So to solve it, we are going to use one of the parameters that we can use from our Content Delivery API. Storyblok Content Delivery API returns the main story data as we requested. So for example, in this case, popular articles component live inside of the home story. This is why we receive more detailed information data about the home story from the Content Delivery API. To resolve the relations from the source code level, let's have a look at the draft JSON data path first. So inside of this popular articles, there is a field type called articles. So we are going to use this data path to resolve the relations. Moving on to the VS Code and open up this REST parameter slag.astro. I would say the source code file. And then when you scroll down and where you find a Storyblok API, use Storyblok API, and there's await Storyblok API with the get method. This is where we are going to add additional lines of the source code. So nothing to delete, but we are going to add under the version draft here, we're going to add the resolve relations. And then because these popular articles are in array, we are going to wrap with the array. So I'm going to wrap with the single quote with the data path that we figured out on the draft JSON. Popular articles, the component name first, and the field type name, articles. So make sure the path is correct and hit the save button. And let's have a look at how it's going to look on the visual editor. To check out for more details on how to use the resolve relations parameter, you can have a look at the Storyblok.js SDK's README in the description below. On the VS Code, let's register again the popular articles from the Astro's config file. I'm going to open up the sidebar and open up the config file. So here we commented out, so let's put it back again. Hit the save button and execute the development mode. So I'm going to go back to the browser and see if it's going to work or not. So, seems like the content has been rendered, and yes, we have the popular articles component and the content has been rendered as well. So we have the headline and we have the articles, and the resolve relations worked pretty much well. You can check resolved stories on the JSON response by adding the resolve relations parameter by opening the draft JSON. So click this down arrow, hit the draft JSON, and I'm going to display the URL in here. So what I'm going to add would be the resolve relations parameter should be set to equal to the popular articles and the field type name articles. So let's see what I'm going to get. So here at the roles, there is the article 1, much more detailed information about the article 1 story, and here is the paragraph info and the article 2. So we have all the details for the article 1, article 2, and article 3. So simply just by adding this resolve relations parameter from the content delivery API after the path of the draft JSON will also allow you to have another way to check the relations in between those different stories. You can see more examples on our content delivery API documentations available in the description below. We are going to create a last component we define and registered, which is all articles. I'm back on the VS Code. Let's create this all articles component. So under the directory of the Storyblok, that's where I'm going to create this component. All articles.astro. So I think I don't have the typo, I hope. And what I'm going to do are going to be 3 things in here. So let me actually leave it as a comment out. So first thing what we are going to do is we are going to request the multiple stories. And then after that, we are going to tell our API to deliver the stories inside of the below folder by using a specific parameter from the content delivery API. And lastly, we are going to exclude the root story inside of the blog folder because we do not want to list up the blog overview story inside of the all articles, right? So that's what we are going to configure inside of this all articles component. Let's get started from the step 1. So above from this step 1 comment, I'm going to take another shortcut because these are pretty much what we already covered and learned together in the previous video. So I'm not going to spend another time, but instead I'm going to get this first step done. So we are going to request the we are going to retrieve the multiple stories. And to do that, because we are going to use the content delivery API's parameters inside of this scope right here, to modify the Storyblok API and use the, not modify, but use the Storyblok API and to use the get method, and inside in here, I'm going to use a parameter code starts with. So what this parameter does is actually to define which exactly the name of the folder should start with. So inside of this blog folder is where exactly we want to start with. So that's where we want to get the multiple stories. And this is already actually the step 2. So I am going to move these comments in an order so that we all can understand what we are doing here. So first of all, this is the first step. And this is the second step we've already done. And the third step is using another parameter code is start page. So I'm going to write this parameter here. And because this parameter takes the Boolean value, so I'm going to set this as false. And this is actually already the step 3 that we wanted to complete. So there you go. We have more than enough fundamentals to use the parameters from the content delivery API to fetch the multiple stories. Next up, I'm going to complete the rest of the part, which is most likely to, interact with the data, to fetch the headline of the old articles and render the components that we want to see it on the browser. So I'm going to take another shortcut because this is, again, pretty much what we all discovered already from the previous video. And also in this current video. So we know how to actually map the multiple articles to display in one place. This is very similar to what we configure the popular articles, right? But instead of resolving the relations, we are using the content delivery API to fetch the multiple stories. So as you can see in here, we are calling our article card to apply a nice styling. So I'm going to hit the save button, but it may fail because we haven't yet registered the name of the component. And next up, I'm going to show you on the browser that we do not have yet actually the all articles story defined. So I'm going to create all articles story in the root of this blog folder. Let's create a root story inside of the blog folder. But to do that, because in the beginning of this video, we defined the content type to only use the article. Actually, this root story inside of the blog folder is an exception. So we are going to modify this available content type inside of the blog folder. I'm going to go back to the dashboard screen and going back to the root so that I can select this blog folder and click the settings. So here at the content type, what I did is added the page content type. So you can select multiple content types and it's possible to exclude only a few content types that you do not want to apply inside of this blog folder. So that's what I basically did. Hit the save button after making a change, going back to inside of the blog folder and select one of the story. So I can start to create the new content, selecting to create the new story. So since this is going to be a home and I want to define as a root for this folder, let's check this checkbox. So the real path has been set to follow the name of the story, but I want to have the path to end with blog and / instead of having additional home. So I'm going to actually remove the real path here, even the / and hit the create button. But before doing that, as I was adding additional content type for this special root story, I'm going to change this content type to apply the page so that we can add the nestable components. Let's hit the create button. Let's add the new blog from here, and we created all articles to apply inside of this story. So I'm going to add in here and fill out the value of the headline as all articles. Hit the save button, and yeah, there you go. Now we have all the necessary values and the content being rendered. For more details of all the parameters that I use from the Content Delivery API, you can check them out in the description below. If something is not working so far, please make sure to fork the Ultimate Tutorial GitHub repo. Our current progress is at part 5 branch, and make sure to fork all the available branches so that simply you can just swap the preview API key token to be yours in the environment variable file, and then everything should work. In this section, we are going to manage multilingual content. Alvaro created a short video to show you more details about how many approaches you can find and use from Storyblok, and which approach would be the best for what scenarios. I'm going to show you the field level translation approach. Additionally, you can check it out for more information on our documentations in the description below. As a first step, let's start to add the languages. So I left the visual editor and now I'm at the settings and selected the internationalization from the sidebar. So when you're at the internationalization, there is the option to add the languages. I'm going to add the Japanese, but of course you can choose any other different languages. Hit the add button and save button. So let's go back on the visual editor to check it out if we have this new language option available. Any story can be fine. So now I'm at the home story, and on the header menu here, now I see the default language option. So when I click it, now I can see the new Japanese option is available. When I select it, of course, the content has not yet been localized, but now I can see the modal, the language option has been updated. Let's enable the translatable option from the field type on the components. So as an example, I'm going to select this hero component, and I'm going to enable the feature to localize this headline field type. To do that, I'm going to go to a cog icon says edit field. So from this edit field, now I can find a checkbox where I can enable the translatable feature. After ticking this checkbox, hit the save button, and now I'm at the Japanese instead of the default. So in headline, now you can see the content inside of this input has been grayed out, but now you can, enable this translate another, let's say, checkbox to start to localize the content. So as a content editor, for example, now I can start to localize the content, such as like headline in Japanese. But of course, even when I hit the save button, I don't see the localized headline from here because the preview URL on the left-hand side does not include the JA slug. So that's what we are going to figure it out in the rest of, let's say, this section here. You might have noticed, even though I switched the languages in between default and Japanese, the path for the home story is not changing at all. When I select the Japanese, it should include the JA, the Japanese slug, in the end, right? But it is because the preview is set to the real path. To solve this issue, you can use an extension called Advanced Paths. So to install it, let's go to the app directory from the dashboard. So from here, I'm going to go to the translation. So inside on here, now you can find Advanced Path. I've already installed it, but feel free to click the install button on your screen. Let's go back to the content, and instead of going back to the visual editor directory, I'm going to select the home story and to open up the model of the settings. So after installing this advanced path out, what I want to modify is at the real path. So here you can use squarey format or the syntax to programmatically modify the preview. So this is very simple syntax with the conditional operators. So it says if the language option is correct or selected, now I want to combine with the, let's say, the path I have and merge in the end, and else then it should be without. So this is very simple, and we have the documentations available for you. So if you're interested in, I would highly recommend you to check it out. I would make sure to add in the description below. So yeah, you can have a look at it after watching this video. Hit the save button. And now I'm going to check out my home story. And yes, when I'm selecting the Japanese, let's say language option from the header navigation, the path shouldn't be the real path, but instead I should have the language /JA being added in the end. So when I go back to the default, now of course this JA slug should be removed, and we can review the current progress of the preview we have for the content. And don't worry about seeing the 404 when you select the language preview. It is because we haven't yet generated this path at all yet. So that's what we are going to create the logic later on. As you can see here, you only need one content tree for field level translation. For example, the home story and each translatable field would be stored in the content tree as a separate property with the language suffix like JA, DE, ES, etc. So while you have, for example, JA about and DE about, you only need one about story. And all you need to do is switch the languages from this language option and start to localize the content. Using the internationalization approach from Storyblok will allow us to have help from our API so that we don't need to install any other external packages like IIT Next. But if you would like to read more specifically about how Astro handles IIT-NEN, you can read more details on their documentation available in the description below. Let's solve the issues that we get for a force on the languages or the path of the pages does not exist yet. So to solve it, let's open up on the VS Code a file called with the rest parameter and slag.astro. So in here, what I'm going to do is, first of all, I have already added this line here to be quicker, an array of the languages. So if you want to change or add the new languages later on, we want to create the logic in here inside of the getStaticPaths that we just need to add or change the value inside of this languages array. To do that, I have in general 4 steps that I can show you in here, so that by following these comments, then we can do this process together one by one. So first step, we want to define a slug to use for fetching the data, which is coming from Storyblok side. And for doing that, because we are going to interact with the links, so it means that we can use the links API from our content delivery API. And if you're interested in taking a look at the documentation, here is the place where you can have a look at it. I'm going to add the docs URL on the description below. So here at the links, now you can see the endpoint, CDN links. That's where we added on the VS Code already here that we want to interact with the links, so that we will be able to have this, let's say, data and then links. Then we should be able to log it out, this links object right here. So every stories that we have in our, let's say, space, we should be able to receive those links objects. And to do that, let's go back to the VS Code. And I think I'm going to show you first if it's really possible to log these links object out or not. So let me do that. And I think to be quicker, I'm just going to log it out on the console.log. And I hope you can see here that first of all, there is a blog article 1 in the slug with the default language that exists with the ID, slug, name, and so on. All the parameters that you were able to see from the links object from the documentation. So we are going to use this, and I'm going to delete this line because I just wanted to show you how we are going to interact with. And to follow this first step, I'm going to actually define, let's try to define a slug. And to do that first, I'm going to actually create an empty array of the paths. And later on, I'm going to use a for each, sorry, not the links, it's links, and then for each of the link, and then here, slug should be, yes, a string. And then, yeah, this looks like pretty much what I want to do, but yeah, it looks slightly different, so I'm going to write it down. Languages we use in a languages array with the for each, oh sorry, should be period, for each to loop around the single or every single language value here. Inside there, I'm going to finally define the slug to use for fetching the data from Storyblok. So links, we saw that there is a slug, right? So that's what we are going to use, the value here. So links slug, if it's equal to home, then I think this is what I want to do. So I'm going to use the power from the Copilot. So if the link slug is equal to home, then we set as undefined to, let's say, return the root story. And then otherwise, then we want to have whatever the slugs we receive. So that's the variable first thing we wanted to do. I'm going to move this comment to a little bit more relevant place so that we have a better understanding for the rest of the process. And then let's try to define the full URL as a second step to use for generating all the URLs for Astro this time. And to do that, I'm going to define, let's move this comment a little bit more relevant place. I want to define right after this slug I defined. So in here, it's a little bit disturbing with an indent, but when I hit the save, it should fix it. So let full URL, and what I want to define is the full URL to use for generating all the URLs for Astro. So language, yes, if the language is equivalent to English, and yeah, actually let's do it like this, equivalent to the English, and I want to have a slug. And otherwise, what I'm going to do is, it's a little bit different, but I'm going to borrow again the Copilot's power to modify faster. So otherwise, I'm going to have a slug of the language and the following slug, or same as this undefined home. So if it's home, then I don't need to, or I don't have any following slugs. So I'm just going to end with the slug of the language. Cool. So we have, let's say, 2 steps already completed, and let's continue with the rest of the step 3 and step 4. Before we are going to complete step 3 and 4 here, let's fix one tiny small mistake I made, because I'm doing the for each to the links object, so I shouldn't have the links in here. Instead, it should be a link. So step 3, we are going to get these steps together at once. So first, we are going to create the logic to change the URL for the different versions, and then we are going to store all of them, the language URLs. So to get it done, let me start with creating an empty object for switching the languages. So what I'm going to do is, actually, instead of the scope, I'm going to let lang switch, and as I said, this should be an empty object. I think I'm going to move these steps into here so that we can see where we are exactly working on. So after creating an empty object of the lang switch, what I'm going to do is the languages again for each, but this time, yes, I'm going to use lang, a different, I would say, value in here. And what I want to do is lang, use the lang switch, need to spell it right, lang switch, and then so here I want to iterate the value inside of the lang switch. Then, because this lang here is an array originally, so that's why I wrapped within a square bracket. And here, if the lang is equal to a default English, Then I want to have, let me check what GitHub Copilot suggests me. This looks similar to what I want to do, so I think I'm going to accept it and modify if I need to. So if the language is the default language English, then I want to return a path of the slug. And if there's, let's say, like no slug, then just an empty string. Otherwise, I'm going to add a language slug. I would say the language here, and also in the end, if there is the following slug, then I would add it or concatenate. If not, an empty string. This looks actually what exactly I wanted to do, so it looks fine. And what I'm going to do now is that, because remember that we defined this empty array of the paths, I'm going to start to assign the value in there, or more precisely, push it, because it's an array. So here is the paths, and then I'm going to push it. Yes. And here, yes, I want to use the props actually before I start to use the params. So props. I'm going to explain you why I'm going to use the props here in a second, but let me first start to finish here. Language, yes. Slug, and then switch. Yes. And after that, I'm going to have a params, yes, with actually a slug and full URL. Yes, okay, this looks quite good, but I need to actually return what I have pushed in the paths. So I am going to, let's check the scope here. Okay, I am going to return the paths. Okay, so the rest I think I'm going to erase it. And let me explain you why I'm using the combination with the props and the params here. Well, because Astro's, let's say, SSG, to generate the pages in this case, would work the best to dynamically, rendering those pages in the multiple levels with a combination of the props. So remember, we named this file to use the rest operator, and there is a variable called slug. So this is what we are using the same value in here to generate those pages dynamically. So that with the combination of the props here, this is actually the feature from the Astro side. So with this props and the get static path would generate the pages for slugs to, of the different depths. So that's why I didn't just use only the params, but I used the props as well. All right, there is one last thing before we are going to review what we have worked on. I want to first of all finish this one last step. So let me actually scroll down here and paste it down. Oops, paste it down as a comment. So we want to fetch the correct data for each page. And to do that, first of all, I'm going to work on in this scope right here. So first of all, I want to actually pass not just the slug, but all the values we passed into the get static props. So we passed also the languages, the language. And then we also passed the lang switch. I hope I spelled it correct. And then here, instead of using the Astro params, we are going to use the Astro props. So the reason why is because, we used the Astro params before to get the slugs, right? But now in this case, it wouldn't work. It's because the Storyblok API takes the language as a parameter instead of the part of the URL. So that's the reason why we swapped, the params into the props. All right, so what I want to modify would be inside of here. So after the resolve relations, I'm going to add the language. It's actually just the language, because that's where we can fetch, the correct data for each page. After saving the current progress we've made so far, let's double check if it worked or not on the visual editor. I'm back on the browser and on the visual editor. So I'm at the default language right now. So as I can see on the preview, because the path in here shows the default language, I don't see the localized headline over here. So let's now change the language to Japanese and see if I can see the localized content of the headline or not. Yes, as I was able to generate with the Japanese, slug path in here, now I can have a right preview with the right content. So let's double check if the other stories also follow the same, because if we just generated this home story, it wouldn't make sense, right? So I'm going to have a look at the blog overview inside of the blog folder. Yeah, now I can see the blog overview. I would say the story with the Japanese slug. Of course, we haven't yet made the progress of localizing the content itself. So that's why you see the default language of the content. That's what you can make, the changes after all. And to show you more details, what we covered together in the previous, let's say, part of this video, you can go to the edit field and enable the translatable checkbox. So let's also double check the rest of the articles. So article 1 also has the JA slug in it. And same thing follows for the article 2, like so, and the article 3. So now we have generated all the, let's say, localized or all the JA slug included path for every stories by using, let's say, the get static paths and the props from the Astro feature. As we modify the real path with using the advanced path app, let's also configure the rest of the stories and the folder. I'm back on the dashboard, and home story we already configured, so let's configure the about story. So open up the settings module, and this is the real path in here. So you can copy from what you modified, let's say the syntax from the home story, and let's add after the it lung, add the / and about. So if there is the target language, then we include / about after the language slug, and else then we just end with the / about. After making, let's say, this progress, you can copy this value. Don't forget to hit the save button. In this case, I already configured, so I'm not going to do. And let's move on to configure the same on the config story. So open up the settings and you can configure similar. After you pasted what you modified on the about story, you can change just the name of the story here and here. So hit the save button and move on to configure the real path of the blog folder so that you do not need to configure the same for all the rest of the articles and the blog overview story. So let's select this blog folder and open the settings module, and here we can modify like so. So after the target language variable, then you can set /blog and / because after this blog folder, there are nested stories such as article 1 to 3, right? So don't forget this / in the end, and else you can just end with the / blog, which is going to apply for the blog overview story. Hi, it's Arisa from the future. At the end of the else statement, I'm missing one single /. So I recommend you to add it so that you wouldn't get the 404 later on. So after making this progress, then hit the save button. And now you should be able to see the same preview I was showing you before on the visual editor. We were able to create more than the fundamentals to start to localize the content for each blog entry. However, when we have a look at this blog post overview in Japanese, now you can see here at the all articles component, and the headline more precisely is localized. But what we render programmatically to have all the list of these articles are not being localized. So from now on in this section, let's solve this issue. To solve this issue, let's go back to the VS Code. So I'm still at the same file, and what I'm going to do here is to pass the two props. So this is going to be a little preparation for creating a language switcher later on as well. So to get started, I'm going to pass the lang_switch prop into the base layout because we want to pass these props to pretty much every component. So here's the thing, not the class. So lang_switch and also language as well. So language, and I'm also going to pass this language prop to the Storyblok component. All right, so now we were able to prepare the fundamentals for creating the language switcher for later. Let's also pass the language prop into the page component. So open up a page.astro file. In the line 5, I'm going to add the language, and also here at the Storyblok component, add in the language prop. Now we can get the language prop in all articles component. So I'm at the allarticles.astro file. What I'm going to make a change is right here. So instead of just having a block, I'm going to add language. And later on, I'm going to pass a parameter inside of the Storyblok API.get method. So after the line 12, I'm going to add a language. Actually, this also should be fine, but I'm going to take a shorthand. So where I'm going to pass the language actually prop would be, because this is where I pass the language as a parameter. The rest I want to pass at the article card as a prop. So here I am going to add a language prop. And there you go. I think now we are all set to pass the language prop and the parameter inside of the all articles component. Let's hit the save button and double check the progress on the visual editor. So hit the save button, go into the browser, and yeah, now I think I already can see the localized blog list, all the blog lists available on the blog overview story. From now on, let's refactor the internal links. So what I'm going to do is to modify them to have the automated corresponding locale in each URL. So there are two places where I want to add the language prop. First one is the popular articles, and the second one is the header. I'm going to get started with the popular articles. So first of all, I'm going to add a language after the block, and underneath in here, where I'm going to add is going to be the article card. So after the article card, I'm going to add language prop, like so. Okay, it looks good. Save it. And moving on to the next step. Let's create a utility function to help managing localized links. So I'm going to create a new directory under the source with a new folder, utils, and inside of this utils, I'm going to create a new file called lang.js. So now I have a new file, and I'm going to take a shortcut because it's just a few lines of the code. And in here, let me delete the comment out. So I have, again, an array of the languages, and then here's the function with two arguments, language and slug. What it is returning is if the language is equivalent to English, the default language, then return the slug. Otherwise, then concatenate with the language and the slug. So we are exporting this function so that we will be able to reuse this function in many places. Let's use this utility function inside of the article card component. I'm going to import it first, and let's actually copy already the name of this function. And I'm going to also use the language that I have exported from this utility directory. So language, I cannot spell it right, I need to learn it. Okay, so, all right, I think now I can move on to call this function inside of this anchor element. So I'm going to modify this href attribute. So let me delete the value we have in here. So let me call this function inside of this function, the first argument. What I want to have is language. And then later on, I'm going to set the path of the, is it correct? Let me check. This article slug, I think should be fine. Yes, it starts from the article right here. And this path should be existing on the draft JSON to check the data path, what we usually do. So let's hit the save button and moving on to continue for the rest of the configuration. All right, let's pass another additional props inside of the base layout. What I'm going to do is to pass the language prop in the header component through the base layout. So first of all, let's define the two props. I want to have language and length switch as we define. So, and Astro.props. Then we should be able to get these values. And here at the header component, I'm going to pass these props, lang switch, first of all, and then language. Let's modify our header component. In the previous video, we configured in a way that we can dynamically modify or edit the header menu. In this part of the video, I'm going to use a little bit different approach. So after we created the utility functionality and also interacting with several props such as language and the lang switch, that's what I'm going to use those values. So I took another shortcut. And feel free to grab these source code from the Ultimate Tutorial GitHub repo, like I was doing in the previous part of this video. So here I'm going to explain you what exactly I did. So same as from the previous component, I'm defining the language and the language switch, or more precisely, calling these props language and the lang switch inside of this header component. So we are calling these props actually that are coming from the base layout. And I'm also calling this utility function called getTranslink as we created or defined before. So inside in here, I'm setting the two arguments to set the language. Depending on the link we want to display, the path for the links for the users to create interactive UI. And this is for the blog, and this is for the about, so that we will be able to have the language switcher from the header navigation. As a final step, let's add the language switcher. So we have completed the process to call the necessary utility functions and props, like so. And here from line 18 to line 29 is where exactly I want to explain to you. So here I am mapping the value of the languages which I exported from the utilities, and I'm mapping the those language value. So in this case, inside of this class attribute, because this is where I want to apply the selected language different background color. So don't worry about these values, because these are all coming from the Tailwind CSS. But the point is, if the language matches with the language prop, then I want to apply the different background to make it more visible that this is what users are selecting, the language option. Otherwise, I don't set any unique background style. So at the href attribute, I am setting the lang switch prop with the precise value of the language array. Now we were able to complete all the steps and the features we wanted to implement in this part of the video. So I'm at the default language on the visual editor. All the content is actually localized to follow the English in this case. When I switch to Japanese, I'm going to show you if I can really switch the languages from this language switcher on the header navigation, but first let's see on the visual editor. So when I switch the language, I have the right path to preview the right content in Japanese in this case. So everything is localized and you can preview like pretty much like all the different story, same as before. So here in each article, now you can see in Japanese, and the font also follows the same. And as I promised, let me go to the local host and see if I can really switch the language from the language switcher. So I'm selecting the English right now, and let's choose the Japanese from the language switcher. Yeah, now I can see the home story is displaying in Japanese. So let's go to the blog overview. Now I can see all the blogs are localized in Japanese. Go into one of the articles we have here. The article 3 is in fact in Japanese too. When I switch the language on this article 3 from the default language from the language switcher, I can of course switch to the default language. If you want to deploy what we built together, there is a last part of the ultimate tutorial series available here. So you can check this tutorial out in the description below. Just in case, if something is not working correctly so far from what you tried with me, go to our ultimate tutorial GitHub repo and make sure that you're selecting this part 6 branch, fork in your environment, and swap the preview API key token. We completed building a multi-language blog using Astro and Storyblok together. You did a really great job. Now you have mastered interacting with the field-level translation approach from Storyblok with Astro. If you would like to see all the sources I covered in this video, you can check them out in the description below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button and don't forget to subscribe so that we can create more video content like this. When you have questions, you can write them down on the comment below, or you can do the same on our Discord channel. Happy coding! またね!